All right, we are back. So up to this point, we had initially laid out the drawing in construction lines, and the construction lines kind of help you with little marks to approximate where objects are placed in your picture plane after looking through your viewfinder. And then using gesture line, along with the construction lines, you can help proportionally lay out each object as you're putting this together. So I have 3 objects here. I have the mug and the 2 bottles. I have their cast shadows. There's a box that I kind of broke up, and I'm using the inside of the box. So here's a wall here, here's the corner, here's the other wall. My light source is over here, and this is the ground that these objects are sitting on. It's just a piece of newsprint paper. The light kind of creates this dramatic effect of these cast shadows, sets the tone for the piece, psychologically. So there's shadows, and then how the light is illuminating the objects on one side versus on the other side, they go into shadow. After that, we went and roughed in all the values on the particular objects using either pencil or charcoal stick, and you notice there's a difference in terms of the mark making and the value. The pencil has a tendency to be a little bit more grayer in nature, where the charcoal stick is a lot more black. You also notice that overall my values that I've laid in are pretty light. Obviously they're really rough as well, but the point of going light, it's a lot easier to make things go darker than to go lighter. A lot of times the charcoal will actually stain the paper and makes it really difficult to erase back out in a lot of circumstances. So if you build up your layers of value slowly, you have a better chance of actually getting degrees of value as the drawing progresses. So the bottles, they're a brown dark glass bottles. They're going to be extremely dark, and you can see this in my photo that I took and then converted to a black and white image. They're extremely dark, but then the mug is real similar to the other space. Inadvertently, when I took this photo, the flash popped on and it kind of blew everything out. So when you do take a photograph of your space, make sure to turn your flash off. But you definitely want to convert it to a black and white so you have something to reference to your gradation scales to help you figure out the degrees of value, the amount of pressure you're going to be exerting to create value. Alright, so I have a piece of paper here which will work as my shield. So I'm doing a lot less smudging. What I'm going to start to do is, in this third part, we're going to go over the values and start to blend them, darken them, smooth them out. We might be doing a little bit of diluting, as well as any sort of areas that transition from one value to another value. We will not be using line. We'll just let the 2 values meet, and then that's all we'll need for that. But we want to deal with that transition with the blending techniques. Other things to consider right now: don't worry about details. You don't want to do them yet. In this particular third part of the video, you'll notice that as I start to lay in and blend value, that if I had put in details earlier, I would actually obliterate them. And that's kind of frustrating, because I know some of you would spend quite a certain amount of time on details, but then discover that, oh, now I got to put value in. I'm going to actually go over them and they get destroyed. So with that in mind, I'm going to start laying in just a little bit of a heavier value up here. This it kind of goes up and out from my light source. I have a tendency to go a little bit darker. It's something I've kind of learned over the years, and the running joke is not to be afraid of the dark. But what I want to do is I want to make it a little bit darker up here. I'm going to keep this lighter, and then when I blend it, I can transition from dark to light. Okay, so think of it as a kind of like I'm stepping the value down. Alright, so running that edge, And I'm going to use my paper towel to blend it. And it works really well to wrap the paper towel around your finger. And you'll notice that when I start blending with my paper towel, it'll lift a lot of my value back off. So you might be thinking, well, he did make it darker. Well, this is what's going to kind of happen, is that because of that lifting action, you don't have to worry about going too dark too quick. So that's something that you'll kind of learn as you're doing this, these little tricks. Alright, so I've gone to a new area of my paper towel. You can see how it's lifting a certain amount of charcoal off, but it's also blending it. And what I want to do again is make a transition that goes from kind of this, I don't know, light to mid-gray to this really light area. And as I drag it down into the lighter area that's being illuminated by my desk lamp, it starts to fade. So you guys start to see that fade that's going on. Alright. I'm going to come into the cast shadow of my mug's lid. Using more of the side of my charcoal, it lays in a really nice uniform value. And I'm going to be using the paper towel to blend this in. And I know it's going to do, again, a certain amount of lifting. And what's interesting about cast shadows is you want to blend them in such a manner that they look two-dimensional. They'll just look like a shape, because a shadow is an atmospheric effect caused by where light is being blocked by an object and then being cast on another surface, whether it's flat or vertical. It could even be over an object that has topography. And another thing I don't want is I don't want a heavy outline around my cast shadow. I just want it to be that single value that it presents to me in the still life, and that will help keep it or remain flat. Alright. I'm going to use a charcoal pencil to come into the actual lid. And it's pretty dark along this edge. Again, you always want to be looking at your still life. Look again, and then make the marks. Try not to generalize or only look at it once and then make it up as you go. Again, the still life is not lying to you. It's all there to be recorded, and it really doesn't make a whole lot of sense to ignore it and not give it your full attention as you're drawing, because it's all there. It reveals all. So always look and draw again. Now you'll notice that the marks I'm making are very linear, and that's on purpose. And as I come back in with this blending stump, I can start blending in and making those linear strokes go away, because I don't want any linear elements in this at all, because we're drawing with value. Alright, just want to show you right here, see that value difference? And there's no hardcore defining line between the two. It's just when the two values meet, that's all I need. I don't need to enforce it with another line. Another thing to consider as you're starting to lay in value like I have with the pencil, for instance, don't press too hard. That's another thing you'll discover. It's something you could do off to the side on another piece of paper in your sketchbook. If you press too hard, the lines or the strokes that you make, because they're so dark, will actually stain the paper, and then they're very difficult to blend in and make go away. So just consider that. Another thing you can do is you can take your paper towel that you use to blend up here and also use that to use to blend. Okay? So running the shape. Okay, so there's that. Now, it may appear like this is just real similar to that in terms of the values, but I can actually come back to this later when it comes to details, which will be at the end. They'll be the last video. I'm going to use my eraser to pull out highlights and dilute areas, and then areas that are really strong in terms of a contrast, especially right here, I can heavy it up with a little bit more darkness. Okay. So again, right now we're just smoothing in stuff, getting it not quite fully finished, but to a point where I can then come in and do details. So I'm now going to put this on the back burner. I'm going to move on to the next place. Okay. So just be careful that you're not being enticed in fully finishing each specific area all at once. Alright, I'm just putting in heavier values where I see them in this particular sort of real mechanical device, the hinge on the lid, and then I'm going to come in with my blending stump, smooth those out, and then later I will return with my eraser and get them even more streamlined. Alright, on the top of the handle of this mug, it's a dark blue, which translates as a pretty dark black. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in. So the angle at which I can see this mug, I can see a certain part of the top of the handle, and that's where the blue exists. So put that in. As it rounds down, the top of the mug disappears out of sight for me, but I still see kind of an edge of it. Okay, so there's the handle. Alright, inside of the mug, again, the light source is over here. So this will be darker over here. I can see a little bit of the edge or the thickness of the mug, so I want to keep or retain that. Just going to blend the inside of this mug. You notice I'm using kind of more of the side of my blending stump. I'm just modeling or sculpting the value into the paper surface, getting it to gradate from dark, and as it moves this way it gets lighter and lighter. And I can promote that even more by taking piece of paper towel that's relatively clean, and I can lift some of that charcoal away. See that? And then it really promotes it more so of dark to light. Alright, I'm going to come over here on this side of the mug. Because it goes into shadow. Just lay in a heavier value because I'm going to use the paper towel to blend this, and I know the paper towel is going to lift a certain amount away. So run the edge and then kind of drag the charcoal out towards the center of the mug, and what it'll do is it'll be slightly darker here, and as you drag it out here you get less and less charcoal and it gradates it. When you drag it out you want to kind of use that slight cross contour stroke, and what that will do is it'll help retain the cylinder-esque-ness of this particular mug. I'm going to hit this edge one more time just to promote a little bit more of a darker dark, and then I'll hit that one more time. Just like that. Alright, I had mentioned before that I have there's like a pattern on the mug. I'm not going to worry about that right now because I know I'm going to be constantly moving around this and I'll inadvertently smudge into it. And because the pattern on the mug is this dark blue, or it's black now because we're doing a black and white drawing, it'll smudge even more so. So I'll save that as a detail, which you always want to save towards the end of the drawing. Alright, so I'm going to move on to the cast shadow here that's being casted from this dark bottle. So I'm just going to go into it with my paper towel. And again, it's an atmospheric effect. I want to keep it looking flat. I don't want to give it any volume or details to suggest that it's anything but a flat shadow. Alright. And I'm going to make down here, I'm going to make the cast shadow just a little bit darker, because I notice when the shadow hits my cardboard box that's in the background, the cardboard box is darker than the newsprint paper that my objects are sitting on. So if you remember local value, the same quality of light is hitting the ground as well as the box, but because the box is darker, this shadow will be slightly darker due to that idea of the local value. So that means then I want to make my cast shadow on the box just a little bit darker. So you probably notice I've been doing layers, and this idea of building up the value, not going dark too quickly or in one shot. So that's a lot better. Alright, now I'm going to move into the background. This is this cache shadow area, and I want to again make this just a hint more darker at the top. And visually, this wall here versus this wall is a lot darker, so I'm going to add, that's why I added more charcoal, but you'll notice it just looks darker anyways. So using a circular blending with the paper towel, this is basically pushing the charcoal into the surface of the paper. My paper has a slight tooth to it, or texture, and that's what's holding on to my charcoal. That's why it sticks to the paper. Alright, here I want to make the transition from this to that, so I'm going to go to a new part of the paper towel that's a little bit cleaner. And again, the paper towel, not only does it blend, but it has a tendency to lift. So I want to make that transition. Again, I don't want to make a transition using line. I want to use value. So when two values meet, you can use or just rely on where that happens. But because of the lighting that I'm having, I want that transition to gradate. Alright, I'm going to go into the bottle now. And I'm just going to start defining some areas, but I want to help promote the darker values that this particular object offers. And I've got these highlights that kind of run down the sides here, and I'll try and draw around them to keep them clean. But I know that I can also come back with my eraser and go back to the white of the paper later. So if I do go over them by accident, I'm not too worried about it. Let's see, the cork is in here. Here's the grommet for the cork. There's a hole. My pencil was wearing out, so I'm just switching pencils. And as I'm looking and drawing, I'm looking to see where the dark values are at. I'm avoiding the highlight areas. So in a sense, I'm going around those highlight shapes so that they remain in their illuminated state. Again, don't worry about hardcore details at this juncture. It's all about just getting value in, either you're darkening areas, diluting areas, but the main point is that you're streamlining, smoothing stuff in, and blending. And there's sort of a fan of dark right here on the top of the body of the model. In a sense, you can kind of think that this is almost like you're blocking out specific dark shapes that make up the value within this object. So glass, metal, and then some smooth reflective surfaces have a tendency to have values that are in high contrast. And what that means is, when I say high contrast, there'll be a lot of end of the spectrum sort of values, either really light or really dark. So black and white. So you'll notice that, so the quality of the surface of that particular object gives the effect that has high contrast because of its reflective quality. Alright, so I'm going to move on from that to the bottle below. Again, I'm just filling in the major values, avoiding the areas that have highlights. As you're doing this, you'll also inadvertently kind of bring your item into its true shape. I have an arsenal of charcoal pencils here to help me get through the video so I don't have to resharpen. Essentially blocking out areas, specific shapes that you do see on the bottle. Alright, I'm going to move on to the cast shadows that are on the ground. around the objects, and let's see what the brush does. That's not working to my satisfaction, so I'm going to switch to paper towel. Oh, that's way better. I try to blend in the direction that the shadow is being cast. So I blend away from the object to help stretch it. I have a tendency to leave just a little bit of a glow around my object, and then later when I come in with details, I put kind of a heavy shadow along with it to help show the separation of the object from the ground, and that works really effectively. So I robbed some of that charcoal from the bottle to kind of push the shadow just a little bit darker. So what I've done is I've made the shadow here just a little bit darker. It's because it's closest to us, the viewer, so it's going to be slightly darker, more saturated, but as things go away, they'll be a little bit lighter. And I kind of want to make this go up. So I have this flat area, then I have this wall. So that's one other little technique that you can do, or trick, to help kind of promote that sense of depth of space. You see how this is slightly darker up here than down here, but I don't have a strong outline to denote that transition. It's just when this value meets here, it changes and then it goes vertically up the wall. So I want to get that, and then alright, so the cast shadow of the bottle on this part of the mug. Alright, so you can see how much the drawing has evolved. Everything is smoothed in. These are still kind of rough, but I'm not worried about it right now. But this is a lot more smoothed in, a little bit more blended. Things are starting to become more defined, and they start to kind of come out of this mess. The background here on the wall is, for me right now, it's kind of a horror show. I don't really like the little lines that my paper towel made, but I can come back and fix those later, so I'm not going to have a hissy fit about that. I like how this is staying lighter than this wall. I like how this is staying relatively clean, and that this is getting a nice amount of illumination from the light above as well as from my right side. And that the mug has, it's sort of a gray clay color, and it's really the brightest object. So I liked it how this is glowing. These are really dark and they're sort of ominous, but they kind of work with this strong U that's happening, and then the second U that's happening again. If you did break this up into the thirds, you'll find that the two focal point sites are here and here. So compositionally it works really well in terms of where the objects are placed, based on that idea of the rules of thirds. I have a certain amount of dramatic lighting that creates these interesting cast shadows on the wall behind these objects, as well as some sort of atmospheric effect of shadows moving towards them, so that there's some dialogue that's happening between these and these. Alright, so at this point, this concludes this portion of the video demonstration where I've talked about blending, smoothing in areas, and getting the values out of the rough, streamlining them. So the next video will be finishing up blending and then bringing in the details to finish up the drawing.